Hi everyone, Tony Tonkin here. Last week we discovered that Kathy Taylor is leaving, and there are many of us in the community here who were kind of rejoicing on that very fact. I did a post on it, in fact, but what I didn't know was an interview she did with the ABC radio earlier in the week. And when I listened to this audio, I realised that there were substantial reasons as to why she left, and one of them has to be her blinking incompetence. And if we take this audio that I'm about to play you, and we look at it in its context, that is the overall experience of this woman running the Department of Child Protection, we will realise the incompetence that actually sat there for so many years. Her inability to be able to respond to and answer Anthony Bevan's questions in relation to her was, to say the least, well. It was outstanding that she wasn't, after all these years, being able to offer any sort of reasonable response to any of the questions that he and his colleague asked her. So I'll play it to you. It's only a couple of minutes, so bear with me while you listen to this. You may not have heard it. And then we'll talk about it. Either I'll interrupt it or we'll talk about it on the other side of this. So here she goes.
ABC.
Kathy Taylor, can you explain to us these terrible statistics? Almost 60 children who were removed from unsafe parents or reported to the authorities as being at risk have died in the past 4 years.
What I can say to you, in 2019, my recollection is there were approximately 81 deaths of children and young people in South Australia. And this is all in their annual report. This is not my data, this is their data, David. Yeah. In 2020, it was 73. And then my recollection is in 2021, after the...
I don't even know what... I don't know what she means by this is only her data. No, their data, not her data. I'm sorry, I was getting an echo. I don't know what she means by that. Whose data was it? The fact is that she was minister during this period, and there were these extraordinary number of deaths of kids that were in care, or at least known to the department. And here she is trying to make an excuse in the first instance by saying this is data's data. It doesn't matter where it comes from. You know, and this is the indication that there were so many, tens of hundreds, there were 60-odd deaths, and she was responsible for them, but she's not going to take responsibility because apparently, according to her, it's somebody else's data.
It went up slightly to 104, but they're finding that across the 17 years, they've definitely seen a decline. So generally, it's less than 100.
So those figures, 81, 73, 104, 12 of those had contact with your department.
David, across 3 years. It's not just the 12 months before.
But your department is coming into contact with a much higher percentage of children who die than for the general population.
So, David, I think the really important question that we all have to...
I just need to say that I think that's a wonderful statement that he makes, that in reality the number of kids in care have a greater possibility of dying than does anyone in the general population. That is a fabulous statistic, and we all need to note that because it does show the inadequacy that sits within the department. Now, I understand that there are so many people who are or so many kids that are at risk in that category. I get that, but in the general population, there are heaps and heaps of kids that I guess are still at risk, but it doesn't seem to happen to the same extent as it does if they're in the care of the minister. And the reason why they're in the care of the minister is so that they do not get harmed, because clearly there are shitty parents out there, obviously, who had harmed and damaged his kids. Not necessarily true, but that's the way they view it. But so I thought it was a really great question to ask, and she didn't know how to answer it, basically.
Why are 1 in 3 South Australian children being reported to the department every year? And I think that's the real question, rather than the question you just posed, because I think it's incumbent on us as a community to ask, Why are we seeing so many reports raised with the Department for Children and Young People? Why are we seeing, such an overrepresentation of those living
So here we go. It is the community's fault that we're reporting, the community is reporting doctors, nurses, social workers, psychologists, teachers are all putting in these incredible number of reports. And clearly, if they weren't doing that, if they weren't reporting them in the volume that they are, there wouldn't have been an issue. However, we do need to remember that it was the government who insisted on making notification mandatory to certain professions. So you've created this problem, so don't blame the community for the fact that it just simply exists.
Socioeconomic disadvantaged areas, why are Aboriginal children being reported at different rates? And I think that's actually the driver to this.
If she doesn't know why Aboriginal, Indigenous and First Nations children are being reported, then where in the frickin' hell have you been for the last 100 years? It's beyond me that her answers demonstrate a complete lack of knowledge of economic, social impacts that government decisions have had on the community, and the lack of effort placed into providing services for communities so that they could address some of these issues. It amazes me to think that a woman who has been at this job for so long has so little understanding as to the reasons why. She could have had a conversation with David about why these issues are there, what they've attempted to do in order to rectify these issues. But oh no, in true Cathy Taylor fashion, she goes on the defensive and doesn't answer the questions because she's either afraid to, or she doesn't know the answers. And to think that she doesn't know the answers after all this time, I find is absolutely appalling.
Been brought to the department's attention, and that child later dies. The mortality rate is much higher for those children for the general population. Doesn't that point to a failure by the authority to care for those children?
Not at all, David.
Well, what's the point in putting them in touch with the department if a higher proportion of people who've come in contact with your department are dying than the general population?
That her response, not at all, David, is dismissing a reasonable argument. These kids have come in to care with you, to care for them, and you've failed to do so. Whose friggin' problem is that? Well, clearly it's not the departments where the kids are supposed to be cared for. It's the community. It's the notifications. And she said not at all and just left it at that. Wasn't even prepared to discuss it with David in any form. Absolutely, absolutely atrocious and extremely, extremely sickening. And I don't know about you, but really maddening to think that this woman's been in charge of this department for so many years, and government after government has allowed it to happen until now.
And that points to a problem.
Do you take any accountability personally and on behalf of your department for any of those deaths?
We participate in child death processes through coronials and other matters, and quite appropriately, we take accountability when there are findings that it could have either been prevented or that there are critical learnings. What I'm reflecting on, Stacey, is how do we stop blaming the Department for Child Protection staff, and actually how do we as a community take greater responsibility for keeping children and young people safe?
See, the whole thing is about blaming the community. This is her thing. The department were never responsible for kids that died while in care, or kids that they knew about who either died or became ill or whatever. There's just completely denial around any responsibility. So she says, well, there's all these inquests. We'll take responsibility once someone tells us that we should have been responsible. In the Chloe Valentine case, the coroner came out and said, you stuffed up in all of these areas, and some of those people got promoted. How does that work? No one seems in this department to want to take responsibility. This woman's interview was atrocious. It is an absolute disgrace that this interview, that she behaved the way that she did in this interview. And if this has been a tenure for the whole time that she's been with the department, then you and I should have asked, why wasn't she sacked earlier? And if this is the way the department thinks, Fiona Ward and the other people that are now running the department, basically, if this is the way they think about child protection, then we are stuffed. There is nothing we can do about it. If this is the mentality that permeates the child protection system in this state and across this country, then we're in bad shape. And this is the type of person that's been looking after the child protection system, infiltrating her ideas, perpetuating some of this garbage about the community responsibility when they have taken no responsibility whatsoever for the way that they've treated kids. I don't know how you think about all of this, but I think that was a revealing 2 minutes about this woman who, thank God, is going. So we'd like you to subscribe to us, get more of these videos. There'll be more to come. I'm hopeful that at some particular point there will be a change and that you and I will see that change, but I'm not all that hopeful, I can tell you right now. Thanks everybody for being with me. Take care, look after yourselves, and more importantly, be safe.